Hello viewers, for today we are going to have the critical analysis of Sylvia Plath's Tulips. So before jumping over to the poem, let's have a brief introduction about the poetess herself. Sylvia Plath was a very renowned American poetess, novelist and short story writer who was born on October 27, 1932 and is best known for her collections included The Colossus and Other Poems 1960, Ariel 1965, The Bell Jar 1963 and the collected poems 1931, for what she won Pulitzer Prize for Poetry in 1982. Her themes are generally the state of mind in extremity, an array of intense emotion ranging from love, hatred, and fury, to hopelessness and sense of betrayal. Plath gained reputation as one of the most important American female poets only after her death on Feb 11, 1963. So these are the contents of my video. I'll be covering introduction of the poem, the text of it, then we will listen to the brief summary of the poem, structure of the poem, various poetic devices, multiple thematic concerns, and there will be a brief comparison with Wordsworth's Daffodil, and finally some critics' commentary, then my personal opinion regarding this poem, and then finally the conclusion. So let's begin with the introduction of the poem. The poem Tulips was first written on March 18, 1961 by Sylvia Plath. It was first published in New York Magazine in 1962 and included in the collection of Ariels published in 1965. This poem is one of the subtlest and best organized poems of Plath. The speaker of this poem, most probably Sylvia Plath herself, is a person who has suffered most in his life. Her principle is I let things slip. The material ending of the poem by Plath is the best organized from the viewpoint of craftsmanship. Plath wrote this poem after going through an appendectomy at the hospital. The poem was originally named Sick Room Tulips in Hospital, but she later shortened it. Within this piece, she taps into themes that are common in her work, that is death, pureness of death, confinement, and illness and sickness. So before the summary, let's have a look at the original text of the poem. The tulips are too excitable. It is winter here. Look how white everything is. How quiet, how snowed in. I am learning peacefulness, lying by myself quietly as the light lies on these white walls, this bed, these hands. I am nobody. I have nothing to do with explosions. I have given my name and my day close up to the nurses and my history to the anesthetist and my body to surgeons. They have propped my head between the pillow and the sheet cuff like an eye between two white lids that will not shut. Stupid people, it has to take everything in. The nurses pass and pass, they are no trouble. They pass the way gulls pass inland in their white caps, doing things with their hands, one just the same as another, so it is impossible to tell how many there are. My body is a pebble to them. They tend it as water tends to the pebble it must run on, smoothing them gently. They bring me numbness in their bright needles, they bring me sleep. Now I have lost myself, I am sick of baggage. My patent leather overnight case like a black pillbox. My husband and child smiling out of the family photo. Their smiles catch to my skin, little smiling hooks. I have let things slip. A 30-year-old cargo boat, stubbornly hanging on to my name and address. They have swept me clear of my loving associations. Scared and bare on the green plastic pillow trolley, I walked my tea set, my bureaus of linen, my books, sink out of sight, and the water went over my head. I am a nun now. I have never been so pure. I didn't want any flowers. I only wanted to lie with my hands turned up and utterly empty. How free it is. You have no idea how free. The peacefulness is so big it dazes you. And it asks nothing, a name tag, a few trinkets. It is what the dead closes on finally. I imagine them, shutting their mouths on it like a communion tablet. The tulips are too red in the first place, they hurt me. Even though the gift paper I could hear them breathe, lightly through their white swaddlings like an awful baby, their redness talks to my wound, it corresponds. They are subtle, they seem so float through, they weigh me down, upsetting me with their sudden tongues and their color, a dozen red lead sinkers round my neck. Nobody watched me before, now I am watched. The tulips turns to me and the window behind me where once a day the light slowly widens and slowly thins and I see myself flat, ridiculous, a cut paper shadow between the eye of the sun and the eye of the tulips, and I have no face. I have wanted to face myself. The tulips eat my oxygen. Before they came, the air was calm enough, coming and going breath by breath without any fuss. Then the tulips filled it up like a loud noise. Now the air snags and eddies round them the way a river snags and eddies round a sunken rust-red engine. They concentrate my attention that was heavy, playing and resting without committing itself. The walls also seem to be warming themselves. The tulips should be behind bars like dangerous animals. They are opening like the mouth of some great African cat, and I am aware of my heart. It opens and closes. Its bowl of red blooms out of sheer love of me. The water I taste is warm and salt like the sea and comes from a country far away as health. Now we will have the brief summary of the poem. The poem begins with the speaker noting the arrival of red tulips in a hospital room. While for some these would be welcome, for Plath they are a shocking and brutal reminder of a world she would like to forget. That is, the world of life. She had grown used to the white purity of the space she resided in. It took her as close to death as she ever gotten. The nurses, also in white, allowed her to slip beneath the sea on a wave of anesthetic while she got up for a procedure. This is a state she longs for, one that allows her to let go of her baggage and be free. But now that the tulips are there, that's all over. They remind her of her wound from her appendectomy, but also her mental wounds. They are loud, constantly breathing and reminding that here she is still alive. As the room progresses, the tulips become more stressful and all-consuming. They are the focus of the room and all that she can see by the end. The poem concludes with an image of the poet's heart trying desperately to save her out of sheer love of her. She is reminded of land far away that she used to inhabit. It was one of health and life. The structure of the poem, Tulips. Tulips by Sylvia Plath is basically a 9-stanza poem that is separated into sets of 7 lines. The stanzas are in the iambic pentameter, but sometimes they change into iambic as a meter. Apparently, Tulips is in blank verse form, but not free verse. A reader can find important examples of half rhyme as well as other poetic techniques that create the feeling of both rhyme and rhythm. For example, quietly and these in line 3rd and 4th of the first stanza. In the 4th line of the same stanza, there is another example with light, lies, and white, empty, and free in line 30th and 31st of stanza 5, as well as me and breathe in stanza 6, line 36 and 37. Hence, Plath has attempted to write this poem as 9-stanza rhyme royal form, and Robert Gray comments on the verse form that it is normally free but has a subtle iambic base that transform apparently casual remarks into memorable speeches. Its subject is relatively straightforward. Its subject is basically a woman who is recovering from a procedure in a hospital, receives a bouquet of tulips that affront her with their glaring color and vividness. She details the manner in which they bother her, insisting she prefers to be left alone in the quiet whiteness of her room. The most important quality of this poem is its rich, evocative, poetic techniques which Sylvia Plath has used here. From the very first line, the tulips are personified as too excitable, and its redness is juxtaposed against the snowed-in atmosphere of the hospital room. The paradox is shown because the human here is lifeless, learning peacefulness, lying on bed quietly, whereas the tulips, inanimate objects, are too excitable and full of life and passion. The second stanza begins with the eye imagery, where Plath, using simile, compares her head as an eye between two white lids that will not shut up, and Plath, like the stupid pupil, has to take everything in. The imagery is disturbing because, like the eye, Plath sitting over the sick bed has to look upon everything. The movement of the nurses is metaphorically being compared with gulls and that pass inland in their white caps. In the third stanza, Plath has employed water imagery in which the nurses as water are tending the pebbles. She says, "My body is a pebble," here metaphor, and brings the speaker numbness. The image of photo frame of her husband and children is again disturbing, whose smile catch to her skin like little smiling hooks, who are constantly hurting her, again simile. In order to present her burden of heavy baggage of rotten memory, she in stanza 4 metaphorically compares herself with a 30-year-old cargo boat who is attached to her name and address and wants to leave her loving associations. She then metaphorically associates herself with a nun. In the next fifth stanza, there is an imagery of dead shutting their mouth from stanza 6, and there is a change in her tone as tulips started having their influence over her. They are personified here as they breathe like an awful baby and are talking with her bones. Their red color is juxtaposed against the whiteness of the room and are metaphorically compared to tongues and red lead sinkers. Next in 7th stanza, they are again personified as watching the speaker, and speaker is compared metaphorically with cut paper shadow who is without substance and caught between two sides. In 8th stanza, the water becomes the symbol of both life and death. She says, now the air snags and eddies round them the way a word snags and eddies round the sunken rust-red engine. She is constantly drawn to them, so much so it feels as if everything in the room is as well. In the 9th stanza, as the tulips' influence has been intensified, the walls are now personified as warming themselves. The speaker is bewildered with the conflict in her mind between her desire for the simplicity of death and the tulips' encouragement toward life, due to which she wants the tulips to be trapped behind the bars like dangerous animals, simile, because they are the reason behind this conflict. The simile is continued when the poet describes them as opening like the mouth of some great African cat. The image of tulips, how she sees them opening and closing, reminds of her heart that is now filled with hope and love and is now opens and closes, trying to hang on to a life. It tries to save her out of sheer love of her. Therefore, throughout the poem, the tulips become the symbol of love, which is speaker craving for, passion, hope, and most importantly of life, which has been given to speaker, and out of sheer love of tulips, her heart opens and closes, which symbolizes that now she is alive and is ready to live her life further. So now let's have a look at the major and minor thematic concerns in the poem. The major theme of the poem is basically the speaker's desire for the simplicity of death and the tulip's encouragement towards life. What attracts her to the sterility of the hospital room is that it allows her to ignore the complications and pains of living. Her loving associations have been stripped away and she feels pure and peaceful. The feelings suggested by her description of the room are hibernation, dormancy, and detachment. Here she does not have a self. She does not have to worry about her family, the pressures of being a woman, her education, etc. Perhaps the harshest image in the poem is that of her husband and child in a picture frame. For the average reader, this is the image we expect to encourage an invalid towards life, but she considered it as simply another factor of annoying encouragement. The tulips thrust themselves in front of her with all her brazeness, noised off to the room. They demand she acknowledge the vivacity of life. By bringing warmth, they do this. One critic described the effect of the tulips on the speaker as the feeling one experiences when his or her legs begin to prickle with feeling after having fallen asleep. The minor themes in the poem include the speaker's interpretation of death as a way to purify oneself. From line 22 to 28, she describes how, with letting things slip, she is feeling as a nun, pure, and now is ready to leave this world with hands utterly empty. And from that moment, the reader can trace the powerful influence of nature even upon a numb heart, due to which started beating its open and closes. While at the very beginning of the speaker is confined in a single hospital room, learning peacefulness and lying quietly, and is feeling as is nobody suffering alone, and is feeling as in suffering alone with her illness, and due to which her patent leather case seems to her like a black pillbox. Due to all, she tries to escape from all these sufferings and want to lie with her hands turned up utterly empty. Here she feels free and pure like a nun, but the nature saves her, and finally her heart blooms out of sheer love for herself, and that's the magic of nature on her. So now let's compare two romantics, one the romantics of 19th century and another of the modern era. The very title of both the poem is a flower, as we all can see. The first is daffodil, the another is tulips. Just as Wordsworth made use of flower in his poem Daffodil, similarly in this poem, Flowers shows her fondness for the flower images in her best poems. The tulips, like daffodils, are vivid and cheerfulness of life, and as the speaker of daffodils was remembering them while sitting alone in pensive and vacant mood, the daffodils flashed upon an inward eye and had filled his mind with blissfulness and immense pleasure, akin to the spiritual regeneration felt by the speaker of the tulips. The speaker here also had decided to leave this world with hands turned up and utterly empty, but the tulips turns to the speaker and filled the atmosphere with loud noise of hope, and then suddenly the atmosphere, which was at first snowed in, now started warming themselves, and the speaker's heart, which was at first still with numbness, are now beating with warmth. She says, I am aware of my heart, it opens and closes, its bowl of red blooms out of sheer love of me. Therefore, the flower imagery is the most important symbol in this poem that indicates love, passion, hope, life, encouragement, of what Wordsworth also talked in each of his poems. Yet, they, more than anything else, are what bring her back to life. It is safe to assume that without them she would have remained ensconced in her bed, enjoying her lifelessness. The irony of the tulips is that they save her by torturing her, by forcing her to confront a truth that she otherwise would ignore in favor of the easier lifelessness. What this interpretation implies then is that the choice of life is necessarily a difficult and painful one, whereas death is not itself a choice but rather simply a refusal to continue living. Rene R. Currie takes this further by claiming that tulips signify by their glorious and bold colors glaring otherness. The tulips work against her desire to lie with her hands utterly empty. She personifies them with excitability, loud breathing, with eyes that watches her as she rests. Her choice of adjectives, excitable, red, vivid, all imbue them with a sense of liveliness. In fact, they are dangerous and alluring like an African cat. Even their color reminds her of her wound, which implicitly suggests it reminds her of her past. Now there are some of the critics' commentary. Barbara Hardy said that the tulips are inhabitants of the bizarre world of private irrational fantasy. Even beyond the bridge of distorted science, they contrast with the whiteness of utility and death. Are like a baby, an African cat, are like her wound, a real red physical wound stitched so as to heal, not to gape like open tulips, and finally like her heart. Even Majore Perloff talked about the choice she makes finally, that she says that in her anxiety, Clark equates the tulip's petals with the red blooms of her heart, which insist on beating despite her desire for death. Finally, life returns with the taste of her hot tears. Health is a faraway country, but now at least it is remembered. The spell of the hospital room is broken. In other words, she comes to realize that life is her natural state and that she will fight for it instinctively in the way her heart beats instinctively. Now there are my personal opinions. I think that tulips are representing nature and are working as a powerful and influential force against all the dull and negative desires to die and escape from the world by the speaker. Instead, they motivate her in a positive direction, that is to face all the challenges bravely, as the tulips nature always do in all rough circumstances. Instead of surrendering to odd circumstances, one must make best out of odd things, and that's what the tulips has taught the speaker as well. So, now in order to conclude, I would say that The Tulips is a rich evocative poem and describes the psychological journey of the speaker degenerating self into a lively and hopeful soul. And to present this, the speaker employs the device of juxtaposition between her dull life and cheerful aura of tulips. The poem is very much rich in rhetorical devices, and the depressed mood of the speaker symbolizes the mood of post-war Second World War era, but the speaker's return to life sustains hope, and hence the poem is immensely engrossing and thoughtful in nature. So in this video, I have also mentioned the references from which I have picked this information, so you can also refer to that. So thank you guys for watching this video. If you like this poem, if you understood this poem very well, do like this video, subscribe to my channel, and do comment in the comment section. Thank you all.